Hi, today we're looking at photographing bullfinches. Now I've done a YouTube video on bullfinches before, but today's approach is going to be different, so it gives you another idea on how you might go about photographing bullfinches. Now I've always said if you can travel as a wildlife photographer, you can be prolific. Travel allows you to take a lot more pictures than just staying local, but at the moment, during all these lockdowns and travel restrictions, I can only work locally. But fortunately, I've always enjoyed the fieldwork side of wildlife photography, and I've got access to this land close by, and I like hide work as well. I really enjoy sitting in hides for some reason, always have done. So I'm out each day, I'm walking about the countryside close to me and just bird watching. I very rarely carry my cameras with me because the opportunity to take the odd random shot by just walking around in these situations is pretty limited. But I'm normally just carrying the binoculars and I'm just watching for things. And what I'm looking for is something that's happening on a regular basis. So when I've been walking along this hedgerow, I've noticed there's always bullfinches here, or frequently here. First of all, you hear them. It's a very distinctive call, a very plaintive whistle. So you know that's a bullfinch, you can't mistake it for anything else. And then you just go back a bit and you watch and see what they're doing and where they're feeding. And it's very noticeable, they keep going to the same area. They're going into this bramble here and they're feeding on it. Now quite often they go inside the bramble where it's very difficult to photograph them, but I have seen them sitting up on the tops a little bit, and when you see this over several days happening in the same area, that becomes an opportunity to photograph them. This is what they're feeding on. I can't say it looks very appetizing. I'm surprised they eat it. Just the dried up seeds of the blackberry bushes. So I've put up the Buteo photo hide at an appropriate distance for whatever lens you're using. I'm going to be using the 300mm Olympus lens today with no extender on it, so that's the equivalent of a 600mm, and then it's just a question of getting in there and sitting and waiting. So fortunately I enjoy sitting inside a hide, and you see things you just don't normally get to see when you're walking around in the countryside. Now I say the bramble doesn't look very appetizing to me. If I was a bullfinch, I don't think I'd want to eat it, but they clearly do. So I'm trying to improve my chances. So I've got some red berries, these are garden bushes, pyracantha, and I'm going to put this out. Hopefully the bullfinches will come across and feed on this as well. In fact, I think it's very likely that they will. So I'm getting two opportunities for pictures. So I'll just put this up next to the bramble bush. Old tripods are very useful for this sort of thing. Just before I jump in the hide, I'll talk about lenses and lens choices. I've got the 300mm Olympus lens on the Olympus M1X camera body, but I've also got the choice. I could put the Leica 100-400 with the G9 on. What I'm tending to do is use the Panasonic G9 for my video work, and I'm using the Olympus my stills work. It would be more convenient if I was just using one, but this has a number of advantages. The Panasonic G9 will shoot at 180 frames per second slow motion. The autofocus in video mode is much better than the Olympus. It will follow a moving subject when I'm doing, let's say, 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second. And so I'm finding that better for video, but sticking to this for stills pictures. And really, my brain cannot cope with the two systems. I would be much better off I just got one camera. I'm never going to get to a point where I don't have to think about what I'm doing because I'm using the two systems side by side. But by keeping that for video and this for stills pictures, I'm just about coping with it. My brain can handle that. And of course the Olympus has got its own advantages, such as the bird tracking, which I think is wonderful. Doesn't work so well on birds in flight so far, but for birds on a branch, not having to worry about where to put the focusing point is great. It's really speeded up my reaction time. The reason I like to use a zoom lens when I'm doing video is you want those different image sizes. You want the bird small in the frame, where you're setting the scene, then the medium shot, then the close-up shot. Now I want that with stills pictures as well. So when I'm using the Olympus, I want different image sizes, but it doesn't matter if the images are taken 2 hours apart. They don't have to match, they're just individual pictures. When you're doing video, they do have to match. You're going to edit them together. You've got the small shot followed by the medium shot. The bird's got to be on the same branch, same background, approximately the same pose, same lighting. If the first shot is in dull light, then the sun's shining. It's difficult to edit them together. They don't look the same. So as I'm filming, I'm taking a few seconds small in the frame, then I zoom in and take another few seconds and do different image sizes, so then I can edit them together and make a continuous film. Optically, I cannot tell this lens apart from the Olympus. They're both very good lenses, very sharp. Engineering wise, this Leica lens, a disaster. Just cannot understand why they've done what they've done. First of all, when it's in the lens mount, you can only turn it 90 degrees. Why? Why would anybody do that? Lenses can normally turn 360 degrees. It means you can't get a straight horizon all too often without adjusting your tripod leg. Imagine you're stalking something, you keep moving forward a few feet. Every time you put the tripod down, you can't necessarily get the horizon level. I think when they put a team together to design this lens, they forgot to include a photographer. The knob that locks that movement up is very tiny. On my Olympus gear and my previous Canon gear, it was a big knob, easy to find, easy to grip. This is a bit hard to grip. There's the stiffness of the zoom. You can adjust the tension of that stiffness, but even at its loosest, it's very, very tight. So it's awkward to turn. And then finally, there's a foot down here. Where the foot attaches, there's a knob. That knob keeps working loose, and you can't get your fingers onto it. It's sort of tucked away. Very hard to get at. I keep thinking I should get some mole grips and tighten it up, but I don't want to over tighten it because sometimes I'm going to want to take it off. But engineering wise, a disaster. I would like to swap it for the Olympus 100 to 400, but I can't really justify the cost. Am I going to buy the new Olympus, the 150 to 400 mil with the built-in extender? Well, not yet. I've got the money, but until Olympus announce what they're going to do with camera bodies, Micro Four Third wise, in the future, I'm hesitating to spend that sort of money. It's now the middle of February 2021, and in the last few weeks, Olympus have been a bit more positive that they are definitely going to continue with Micro Four Thirds, but until they actually announce something, I'm going to hold on to my money in case I have to swap camera systems again. We are now inside the hide. And how did I know that bullfinch was going to land on that perch and I was going to be in focus when it did it? Well, that's because it's been very repetitive. It's been doing the same thing time and time again. So it's already flown off from that perch and come back to it a couple of times. And what it does, it flies off and hovers in front of the bramble seed heads, grabs a seed head and comes back. So here we go again. This is taken on the Panasonic G9 at 180 frames per second, so slow motion. You can see it's snowing at the same time. It was one of those very mixed days. The sun was shining for half an hour, then a bit of snow would come down. It kept doing that all day long. We'll show it flying off and hovering in front of a seed head again. And this is a very characteristic bit of behaviour for bullfinches. They often hover in front of the food item they're going to eat and grab it rather than land on the food item. And you might start to suppose that this is because they don't like to land on bramble. It's prickly, but they do land on it. But I've also seen them doing exactly the same behaviour with berries. Rowan berries, which appears in my first YouTube video on bullfinches, and also guelder rose bushes too. And there's no reason they can't land on the berries, in fact they do. But sometimes they prefer to hover in front of them, grab a berry and go and land elsewhere to eat it. It was only the male that was coming into the bramble. The female was around and she did eventually land on the berries, as did the male as well. And here the bird can reach the bramble seeds without having to fly and hover. The bill is always covered in bits. Very messy birds. Normal speed now. But I do enjoy seeing birds in slow motion. They look very different. Now here the bird has landed on the bramble, but notice the fanned tail. It's very broad and they tend to fan it out quite frequently when they're perched. Must help them to balance. So the female didn't come onto the bramble at all, but she did land on the berries. And now I've got a completely diffused, out of focus background, which I certainly prefer when I'm doing stills photography. It doesn't make quite so much difference with video. You can have a messy background and a messy foreground with video. It doesn't affect the picture nearly so much as with a stills picture, simply because the bird is moving. It was lovely soft light as well from a stills photography point of view. And the male. Now all the pictures of the male are taken at half speed. So 60 frames per second, then slowed down to 30. So I'm going to show you a few stills pictures now. Now these are taken with the Olympus camera and the 300mm lens. I like that one for the pose. It's very much more upright than in that picture. But the lighting was perfect. A nice soft light. I don't actually like photographing birds in strong sunlight unless I want a fast shutter speed for action. Otherwise a nice soft gentle light is much better. Thanks for watching.